Representative Johnson, good morning to you.
Good morning.
So this year a little bit different than a year ago in that it is not year one of a new session. It's a 4-month session in the first year with a new elected body coming in. This year a 3-year session. There are things that have to happen kind of in terms of orientation, especially for new members. How will the start of this year's session be different than what we had a year ago?
Well, in a 4-month session, let me just say this: not a whole lot of difference, because that first month we have extended deadlines, and you do spend a great amount of time orientating new members, and also we had new leadership across the top, new speaker, and in a lot of ways new chair people. So there was a lot of organization going on that first month. So in terms of the actual work, the legislation, it'll be pretty much the same, except we're just starting in January like we normally do. So interestingly enough, it was a kind of a proving ground that this first session, I think we're going to be dealing with pretty much the same issues that we dealt with last session.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about your relationship with Speaker of the House, Jason White.
I consider Jason to be a friend of mine. I mean, we've known each other since he got elected to the legislature. We've always been able to work well together. He's been very, as a Speaker Pro Tem, he was very open whenever things that I needed, or I needed to talk about things, and in terms of being responsive to as much as he can be, given that we're from two different sides, but extremely responsive to the things that we thought were important to everybody in the state of Mississippi.
I think you're in an intriguing position. Obviously, Republicans have held the majority in both chambers for a long time now in Mississippi. It was the other way for a really, really long time in Mississippi, and then you have the switch, and it's kind of been this way. In terms of getting things done that are important to you, that are important to Democrats in a Republican-controlled House and Senate, how do you go about that? How do you prioritize the things that are important and then try to find common ground?
So, interestingly, people always bring that subject up. When I got elected, the first time I got elected to the Senate, I was elected under the Republican administration. It had just changed from the lieutenant governor had been Brad Dye for quite a while, and then it changed to Eddie Briggs. And what I can tell you, and I still think this is the case, except now we have more national politics involved. But, we had the party issue was more of a name only kind of thing. People focused on, the needs that the state needed to address. There was more of a difference, and I think this is still the case, more of a difference between more urban populations as opposed to rural populations. There was less of a Democrat-Republican thing. And for my purposes, I still function that way, because I feel like the issues and the problems have less to do with party and more to do with where you live, where you are, and what those needs are in those particular areas. I'll give you a perfect example. I mean, it's a sore subject to some people, but, the chairman of Ways and Means lives in a certain area of the state, in Tate County, where, west of I-55, right along that corridor. And in North Mississippi and Northwest Mississippi, there are a lot of needs. And so he illustrated that in terms of the money that he was able to appropriate for Tate County to address some of those needs. Those needs are true across the board. And so what we find is that areas like Tate County, areas like Washington County, and those areas in that part of the state get far less attention than areas like Madison, Rankin County, and Jackson County, or some of the coastal counties. And so it puts us in a position that I try to stay focused less on national or party politics and more on what are the needs of the state. For instance, the Medicaid expansion issue, I don't see that as a political issue. I see that as communities need health care, communities need doctors. They certainly need to keep their hospitals open. Infrastructure needs. There's not a city in this state that doesn't have 120-year-old pipes that need to be replaced, water systems that are cracking all the time. So, I try to stay focused that way. and keep the party politics separate as much as possible.
I think that's well said, and that's an interesting juxtaposition, right, between national politics and local politics. And I've always kind of thought that all politics ultimately are local, right? I mean, it's what affects me, what affects you on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm not convinced, Representative Johnson, that it's not entirely different when we talk about race relations in Mississippi, because the national narrative about what Mississippi is and has been is one thing. And then we live here and we go to school together and we go to church together and we work together and we are with each other on weekends. And I don't know about your experience, but my experience is I find that there are a whole lot more similarities than there are differences, regardless of the color of our skin.
Well, I certainly think that the national narrative and the national perspective of Mississippi is way off. What we live is a whole lot different than what people perceive we are. And so I think you're certainly right about that. And so that it goes back to what I said. I think, and both sides are guilty of this, of drawing national issues into issues that really don't exist in Mississippi, relationship issues that really are not a big problem here in Mississippi. But at the end of the day, everybody wants government to provide the services that they need to provide, and if we keep that perspective in front of us, then I think we can work a whole lot better together.
You know, you mentioned a second ago that many of the issues that the House and the Senate were dealing with a year ago are the issues that will be on the table again. And you brought up Medicaid expansion. What is your sense as we move toward the start of this session on Tuesday, that the appetite for getting that particular issue across the finish line is? Obviously, the governor has been very much against this, has made some statements recently that have maybe showed a little bit of a softening on his stance, or at least on a willingness to have a conversation. What does it feel like to you going into this new session?
Well, the last session ended, the whole negotiation collapsed. And some people blamed it on Democrats because they were polled. They polled Democrats, and Democrats said, "No, we can't vote for this particular bill." And the truth is that Democrats have been trying to get Medicaid expansion passed for the last 16, almost 17 years. And our position is that if we're going to pass Medicaid expansion, it ought to be real Medicaid expansion. And we also felt like we didn't want to lock ourselves. The bill that actually came out of the conference committee would have locked us into a application for Medicaid expansion that would have assured us being denied acceptance every year. And to illustrate that, the governor even signed the postpartum bill, which was a Medicaid bill, that he would not agree to for 2 or 3 or 4 years before that. But he finally signed one. Administratively, they made some changes in the bill, or there was something in the bill that they sent to CMS. And even though you had both houses approving and the governor signing it, that bill got turned down because we wrote it wrong. And so we were perceptive enough and had been involved in this process longer than just about any Republican who was in leadership, and said that, look, we cannot send this bill to Washington, and we certainly can't send it to Washington every year the same way where they can tell us no. So that part of it was.
So what's going to be different this year?
Now, so what's going to be different this year? We have a new administration in Washington. It was going to get turned down because the Biden administration constantly said, this is how you cannot write the bill. President-elect Trump has consistently said that he wants to do away with ACA, wants to do away with, theoretically, Medicaid, Medicare, the whole thing. He wants to privatize all the health care, even VA health care. And so at the minimum, whatever we pass out of here, at the minimum, no matter how, lack of substance that we Democrats or anybody think that it is, that in all likelihood, a Republican-led House and Senate and governorship in the state of Mississippi sending a bill to a president who they supported, they elected, who seems to, in their opinion, reflect the views and the attitudes and the approach that the majority of Mississippians, for sure, in the country wants, then I think that the state of Mississippi would do itself some good to pass something. And in our opinion, even though we think that the bill, the way it was written, is not going to be an effective Medicaid expansion.
Yeah.
If that's the one that the president will sign, that's the one we'll get out of here. Now, the question is whether or not the leadership is interested in given that the president's attitude towards the ACA is we're going to do away with it. Maybe, I don't know if they're going to take the approach that we're going to pass it anyway and see what the president does. But what I've heard from the Speaker of the House, not the Lieutenant Governor or the governor, what I've heard from the Speaker of the House in public comments is that they're interested in looking at Medicaid expansion. We're going to take another shot at it.